on procurement through the lens of the finance professional. My name is Mohammed Hans. I'm the procurement advisor at SIPFA. I manage the SIPFA Procurement and Commission Network. I'm today joined by Mark Reddy from One Advance, and Mark will give an introduction to himself when I just go through a quick overview of the procurement tax. So I hope everybody's keeping well. And let's have a session on the Procurement Act. But what we would like to do is have a very interactive session. So I'm just going to give you a very quick overview of the Procurement Act, then actually hand over to Mark. He'll give you kind of a presentation, and then we'll open it up to the floor for questions, comments, and observations. So just a quick update. The Act was actually going to go live a few weeks ago on the 28th of October, but was pushed back in early September this year to 24th of February. So the Procurement Act, although it received royal assent on the 26th of October 2023, it hasn't actually come into force yet and won't be coming into force until at least the 24th of February 2025. So it's a long, long wait. But as you will see from this morning's session, there's a lot to do. It's an overwhelming piece of legislation, and but it will go live on the 24th of February 2025. So we've got a few more months to prepare. I think those months will have to be used very, very carefully to make sure that we are ready when the Act goes live. But in terms of the journey from the bill to the Act, this is, as far as the government was concerned, the Procurement Act has been introduced as a major new piece of legislation post-Brexit, with the aim of substantially overhauling and reforming the UK's outdated public procurement rules. It was hailed by the previous administration as one of the largest shake-ups to the procurement rules in the country's history. And why did it want to actually legislate on procurement? Well, we spend approximately £407 billion a year annually on public procurement. It equates to about 12% of the GDPR. So it's a huge, huge sum of money that we're spending. One of the kind of key aims of the Act is to actually consolidate the current legislation around public procurement. So we have 4 separate legislation at the moment. That's all been kind of brought into effect under the Procurement Act from next year. The aims is to speed up, simplify, modernize, make things more flexible, and deliver value for money, as well as create great opportunities for small and medium-sized enterprises. And hoping that, once we've gone through the sessions this morning, we can have some interaction, some discussions, some debate, whether, in your view, this act actually makes things more simplified or otherwise. But we'll have some discussions towards the end. It also allows the UK government to adhere to its international compliance obligations under the World Trade Organization Government Procurement Agreement. So there's a lot that this act is actually doing to ensure that we are compliant both internally as well as externally. So I said it represents one of the biggest changes to procurement rules, but it only applies to England, Wales, and Northern Ireland. It doesn't apply to Scotland. Scotland has its own procurement regime, which is under the Public Contract Scotland Regulation 2015. That will continue. Scotland has started its own journey, procurement transformation journey, but it is slightly behind, and we'll have to wait a year, maybe 2 years, for it to actually complete its journey and arrive at its new procurement kind of landscape. Now, the wording of the Act has changed quite tremendously. At the moment, we have the Public Contract Regulations, which is based on the European Procurement Directive. The new Procurement Act is written in British parliamentary language. And that's a really important point because, as the wording has changed, and ultimately, the courts will be the arbiter of the actual meaning and interpretation of the Procurement Act. But we'll have to wait a couple of years for some of the case law to get through the various courts. The Cabinet Office have very welcome kind of offered us lots of guidance on this act. So colleagues, if you haven't actually started the implementation, do refer to the Cabinet Office to Transforming Public Procurement webpage. There's lots of very useful guidance which you can download and read through the December holidays. The Procurement Act, also very important, is a very skeleton type of legislation. We then have to refer to the secondary legislation. We've had the Procurement Regulation 2024, which has already been kind of laid in Parliament. We'll have other supporting legislation over the next year or so where we get more meat on the bones in terms of how the Procurement Act should really be delivered in practice. Something else that colleagues can take advantage of, this is freely available. Again, a really helpful supporting opportunity made available by the Cabinet Office on the Government Commercial College. So if you're a public sector officer, you can access this training, 10 modules on transforming public procurement to get a better understanding, a good foundation on the new Procurement Act, and you also get a certificate which you can download at the end of completing the 10 modules. Now, this is a very important slide, and because time is limited, I'll keep just to a few points. The public conduct regulations focuses our attention. So if you're a public authority, it focuses our attention, whether you're a finance officer or a procurement officer or a legal person, on the procurement stage. The new Procurement Act is very different. It's a cradle to grave approach, introduces huge amounts of new transparency. While it does give flexibility to authorities how it wants to conduct the procurement, there's lots of additional responsibilities and obligations, which starts from the planning stage. So even before you actually issue your tender notice, there's huge encouragement to do preliminary market engagement with the suppliers. There's new kind of rules related to how you actually conduct your procurement. In fact, the Procurement Act tells you you can carry out your procurement as you deem appropriate. So you can design your masterpiece of the new competitive flexible procedure. The contract award formalities have also changed quite significantly, but then the big change is at the after the contract award stage, a new contract management stage, because the Procurement Act relates not just to the award of a contract, but also the management of a contract. So for the first time under legislation, we actually have contract management obligations. At the moment, you have contracts where the contract management aspects are generally a private matter between you, the authority, and the supplier. In the future, contract management is also something that's going to be captured by the Procurement Act. Some very, very high level changes. The Act introduces a number of new objectives, including value for money, as well as maximizing public benefit. And every authority, public contracting authority, when it's kind of awarding a higher value contract, which is a public contract, it will have to take into account or have regard to these high level objectives. It will also have to comply with the National Procurement Policy Statement, which is currently being updated, and we'll have a new NPPS issued maybe before the end of this year or early next year. The award criteria under the Act has actually changed from most economically advantageous to most advantageous tender. There are new changes to how frameworks actually operated, and a new concept of an open framework has actually been introduced as well. It also updates rules around how you actually check the supplier's due diligence in terms of making sure that the supplier is not an excluded supplier or an excluded supplier. And this is where the finance community, in my view, will actually have to play a leading role. So you'll be checking not just some of the grounds, mandatory grounds and discretionary grounds, but also doing wider due diligence on the financial kind of assessment of a supplier. And this is where the finance community will need to introduce some of the ratio analysis to make sure you get a good, credible supplier that's going to deliver your contract and will be able to deliver your contract until the very end of the contract. There's also new rules relating to conflict of interest. So before you actually go out and procure something, you're going to have to make sure that you carry out a conflict of interest assessment. And again, this is going to be quite important for the finance community to make sure that this is adhered to in the authority. Other rules relating to kind of contract modifications, making sure that the authority takes advantage of preliminary market engagement requires everybody in the authority, not just the finance community, procurement kind of officers, but everybody in the authority to come together and actually make sure that it complies with the obligations and takes advantage of the flexibilities which the Act kind of introduces. The main platform where the Procurement Act will actually be delivered is on the new Centre Digital platform. And this is a new introduction. It's going to be an enhanced finder tender service where all public tenders that authorities publish will appear. Not only that, it will also kind of have lots of core information relating to suppliers. So all suppliers will be given a unique identifier, as well as the authority will also get one. And every time that you award a contract to that supplier, you'll have to make sure that you put the unique identifier of the supplier on one of the various notices that the authority will have to publish. This is where, in my view, the world of Big Brother is going to come into the world of public procurement. And this is something which, if you're an auditor, this is going to be a very, very useful tool for an auditor in the future. An auditor could potentially check what the authority has done in terms of new procurements, any changes to contracts, any direct award of contracts is actually made before it even comes knocking on the authority's door. So this is something that every authority needs to be very mindful of in terms of the transparency obligations. There's not going to be any place to hide. You're going to have to make sure all of your contracts will actually have details appear on the Centre Digital platform. And this is the procurement and contract cycle. This illustrates the number of notices that the authority will have to publish at various stages. Now, those notices which are highlighted in red will be the mandatory notices. So you can see 5 potentially mandatory notices. The other notices will be kind of optional depending on the situation. But for a high, for those authorities who spend several hundred millions of pounds on public procurement, you probably would be required to publish practically every notice which you can see on this particular slide. Whenever I show this kind of slide to colleagues in terms of the new obligations under the Procurement Act, people say, Mohammed, you're actually showing as a vicious circle or a circle of control. There's so many notices that we're going to have to publish, and Mark will actually give you a potential solution to all of these notices. This is really going to be an administrative challenge for every authority, especially if you're a small authority who's actually going to be publishing these notices on behalf of the authority. So there's a lot of structural work that the authority has to do to be ready for the new obligations. And these are the objectives which I've kind of referred you to earlier. So in carrying out a covered procurement, the authority will have to have regard to, so you're going to have to note down, record that the authority has actually delivered value for money, maximized public benefit, acting and being seen to act with integrity, shared information, as well as considered removing barriers for small and medium-sized enterprises. So again, there's a lot of work that the finance community can get involved in this area to make sure that you comply with the objectives. If the authority doesn't evidence how it's actually had regard to the objectives, then it could be judicially reviewed by a potential interested party. As well as the transparency obligations, equal treatment, non-discrimination, and proportionality, that will also have to be taken into account when you're doing your procurements under the Procurement Act. Just a few more slides. The pipeline notice is something I would really like to bring to the attention of the finance colleagues on this session today. So those authorities which spend £100 million or more in a 12-month period starting from the 1st of April 2025, by the 26th of May 2025, we'll have to publish a pipeline notice which will capture all contracts where the authority, valued at £2 million or more, where the authority will be publishing a tender notice or a transparency notice. The whole idea is to actually give advance warning to potential suppliers that the authority may at some stage in the next 18 months be going out for a particular tender so that they can get ready to respond to your tender. So at the moment, every authority should actually be trying to gather its kind of pipeline, engaging with internal kind of client teams to make sure that by the 26th of May, you're ready and you're publishing your pipeline notice. And you're encouraged to keep this updated throughout the course of the year. So the finance colleagues will have to play a big role to make sure that you meet this mandatory obligation if your authority spends £100 million or more. If the authority spends less than £100 million or more, I would still encourage you to do some transparency kind of pipeline notice by putting some details of some of your contracts. It just alerts the suppliers that the authority will actually be going out at some point in the future. Now, this is a very interesting slide and it's very colorful for that reason. If your authority is entering into a contract which is above £5 million, which does include VAT, so again, in terms of finance colleagues, I think you're going to have to play a very leading role to support your procurement colleagues who might not be too familiar with the VAT kind of obligations in the UK. You have different VAT rates applied to different types of contracts. So in this particular situation, if it's a high value contract, the authority will be required to have at least a minimum of 3 KPIs, so 3 key performance indicators, which need to be robust, measurable. So you're going to have to put into place some systems to be able to monitor and manage the supplier's delivery of the KPIs, because at the end of every 12 months and on termination of the contract, the authority will actually be required to publish information relating to the assessment of the authorities in terms of how the suppliers delivered on these key performance indicators. This is a very, very big area of change, a big game changer which the authority must get ready for. The reason for that is the KPIs is something that you need to do on an annual cycle, although you can do it on a more regular basis. Two other aspects, the green box and the blue box you can see. If the supplier is actually in breach, has had a contract terminated in full or part, damages have been awarded against the supplier, or there's been a settlement between the authority and the supplier. Alternatively, when it comes to the blue box, there's not even a breach of contract, but the supplier is not delivering on your contract to your satisfaction. You've given them an opportunity, but they still haven't actually delivered what they promised. Then within 30 days, not at the end of the year, within 30 days, the authority will be required to publish a contract performance notice. The ramifications on the supplier are absolutely massive. So if you're a supplier on this event today, you really need to get really in tune with the obligations of the authority. Many of you will have seen Mr. Bates and Royal Mail, Saga, the serial. This is where the government is saying we don't want any more poor performance of public sector contracts. It's the taxpayers' money that's going into these contracts. We want to make sure that the supplier delivers on what they promise. The impact of this could be if the authority were to publish a contract performance notice, it could potentially result in that supplier being debarred from being awarded further public sector contracts or being discretionarily disqualified from being awarded contracts. So the impact, a doomsday scenario for some of your suppliers could potentially be going out of business. So it's, again, the finance community will have to play a leading role in supporting the procurement colleagues, make sure that you've got good contract management, you've got accuracy of data, and if there's poor performance by a supplier, you actually take action and then in appropriate cases actually then also issue a contract performance notice against the supplier. Just one final slide before I actually hand over to Mark. Again, this is a slide which colleagues, finance colleagues really need to pay attention to because under Section 69 of the Act, every 6 months, not once a year as we have at the moment. So going back to my point about simplification, is it really simplifying things? We'll leave it open for you to consider and maybe have some discussions with us at the end. The authority will be required to publish a payment compliance notice. In addition, under Section 70 of the Act, the authority will also be required to publish every invoice that they pay above £30,000 on a public contract on a quarterly basis. And the important point here is that the director of finance or somebody in the finance team will actually have to sign off these two notices. Now, these two notices will not be ready for the 24th of February. You'll be delighted to know, but they will appear at some stage in 2025. So do get ready for this obligation. And this is something which the government, because of the wider obligations and the objectives of the Act, will be paying huge amount of attention and scrutiny. So you need to make sure that you publish these notices on a regular basis. Just one final slide, Mark, and then I'll definitely hand over to you. So in terms of your implementation, you should be focusing on these four pillars: the people, make sure your team are skilled, your finance team are skilled, the wider colleagues have actually been updated and have upskilled themselves. You need to look at your processes and policies, your data and systems, and Mark going to give us a lot more on systems in a few moments, as well as your transitional plan. So on that note, I'm going to stop my presentation. I'm going to hand over to Mark. So Mark, if you can introduce yourself and tell us who you are, and look forward to listening to you in terms of your session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed, and always a pleasure to join you and our colleagues at CIPFA for these types of sector upskilling, sector capability, thought leadership discussions. So my name is Mark Aretti. I'm the Global Director for Finance, Procurement and Governance at One Advanced. For the last 15 years of my career, I've been involved in started off with ideation, development of government-specific procurement technology. You'll be able to tell from my funny accent that there's a good chance that that didn't start here in the UK, and you are right. For the last 10 years, well, for the first 10 years of those 15, I was delivering procurement, contract, and supply management technology solutions and software, a software startup, to the Australian and New Zealand government sectors. The reason that I think that's contextually, from a background perspective, relevant is both of those countries, as you well know, are Commonwealth-led governments, and Crown legislation exists very similarly to what is being proposed and brought into effect here in the UK on February the 24th. My days and weeks and months these days are spent here in the UK working with a large group of solutions consultants, pre-sales principals consultants, and ultimately nearly 1,500 customers across One Advanced in the public sector, helping them across finance technology, procurement and spend technology, and governance and risk technology. And ultimately, the Procurement Act 2023 has come to the fore as one of the largest challenges for the past 12 months that our procurement and finance, supported by their IT colleagues, professionals have been wrestling with. So you should all be able to see my screen. I am bringing up my laser pointer so that you can follow as I walk through. So I want to start by zooming out. We invited 600 of our customers across the public sector recently. It was in September to a conference, and the Procurement Act was a really important topic that we tabled. I was fortunate to sit on a few panels and chair a few discussions, and I thought it'd be useful to share with you all as finance professionals here kind of what was discussed, or the key topics that came out of that. I had Lisa Stubbs, who's ultimately leading this Procurement Act implementation program from the Cabinet Office, join us on that panel. And I suppose one thing the Procurement Act's done is it's elevated the importance, I suppose the way I say it, it's changed the size of the light bulb over the procurement function and just how strategic it can be to enable contracting authorities to deliver better public value. We also had Trowers and Hamlin, Stuart Brown consults on the Public Procurement Act as a lawyer, specifically, I suppose, talking about the challenges that authorities are going to face. And Mohammed brought it up earlier. The Procurement Regulations 2015, they really focus on the pre-contract process. So being transparent and driving, economically clever decisions into how you award, who you award, and then publishing that contract. But now it's about a golden thread that connects transparency the whole way through the process from, I think I need to procure something, which is that procurement pipeline, all the way through to, I now have finished my term with that contract, with that supplier. It's time to terminate that agreement. And 17 steps within that life cycle where transparency needs to be driven. So 2 slides just framing really quickly who we are at One Advanced, and we'll get straight into what our customers are telling us. We have a large customer base in the UK public sector, and we've been spending a lot of time with them since the regulations were announced. Some of you on this call may be familiar with our finance systems, which are used by over 250 local authorities. If there's anybody on the call from the health sector, the NHS space, we know that the NHS sector there's about 120 NHS trusts that are using finance and procurement technology from us. Quite a large further education and social housing customer base as well. Ultimately, this is what One Advanced delivers to the public sector. We have a portfolio of products, which is called our One Advanced for Government portfolio. The One Advanced platform is ultimately a single scalable technology infrastructure that underpins our portfolio. So when we talk about a platform, we're talking about a single way that security is managed across every product you consume from us. A single way that we apply AI principles, that we apply access management, identity management principles. So instead of having 6 separate products with different infrastructure, security, and technological underpinnings, we have one where we build business-facing applications. What we're talking about today is fundamentally our finance and spend capabilities. But for those of you that might know us for some of our further disciplines, I just wanted to bring that together for context and purpose. Okay, so 1,500 public sector customers, largely in finance and procurement. We surveyed them, we've been surveying them every month as part of our kind of routine customer engagements. And the statistics are, a little bit concerning, and perhaps they reflect where all of you are feeling today. 56% feel pretty unprepared for February. 6% are close to prepared, but 0% are fully prepared. And Mohammed brought it up earlier. The reason that they're 0% prepared is the most recent iteration of the legislation, i.e. exactly what the notices need to say, hasn't been completely articulated yet. So the ability to capture the data that the notice requires, systemize that data, house that data, and then ultimately integrate that with the central digital platform, which is where I suppose all this information and notices need to be consumed or directed. That's the reason that 0% are fully prepared. So if you're sitting there wondering, should I be more ready at the moment? Hopefully this gives you a view of where everybody else is relative to our view of the world. Mohammed brought it up. The Act ultimately touches every organisation that is custodian of the public pound, any contracting authority. I understand from the majority of our audience here, we've got local government in the room, but this does go all the way through to charitable organisations, to colleges, to universities, to health and emergency services. So what's the problem, the way that we see it, or the way our customers are telling us? Ultimately, it is the availability of resources the availability of time, technology, and data to get this implemented in time in available budgets. Some organizations, particularly the larger contracting authorities, have stood up special project offices around this. But the reality is, most of us as public servants, specifically the ones working in procurement or finance that are often under-resourced, we have enough going on with BAU to be carving off separate time to kind of fix this problem. 56% of our customers have told us that. So we're really taking this through the lens of how do we help our community of customers, and we're very fortunate to have quite a large community, and they become our kind of our primary focus. How do we help them get this implemented in the fastest way possible with the lowest barrier to entry? And that comes from a price, from a time, from a resource to implement. So we look at the problem in three ways. Being able to adapt to the change. So that means that we need to take a bit of a responsibility for helping you interpret what's required. The resource constraint, meaning we need the same amount of people doing more things. So how do we help them do those jobs more effectively and efficiently? And then ultimately, the insurance policy. My marketing team won't like me saying that, but helping you comply with what is mandatory. So we have got a mousetrap for this problem. There are absolutely other organizations that have a mousetrap for this problem. We like to think ours is a little bit stronger and a little bit smarter, and we'll walk through that in a moment. It's worth noting we've been working very closely with Crown Commercial Services on that and the Cabinet Office. We are one of, if not the only currently capable end-to-end sourcing, finance, and contract management integrated solution that can cover every single one of the notices. So if you're a customer using our finance management software and using our procurement technology, we have the capability to capture that data, move it through our systems where it needs to, and then up to the central digital platform. The procurement component, or the contract and supplier management component of our technology, is broadly used across the sector. Nearly 37 billion worth of contracts managed in the product, 57,000 contracts. And across the UK, there's over 8,000 users every single day. So I wanted to try and give you a lens by the end of this presentation for you to be able to either look internally or reach out to your procurement professionals. I wanted to give you a lens of the notices, what might be being taken care of in your existing tendering technology, what needs to be kind of published through the Find a Tender service and what we can capture from that, what notices are conditional, and then what needs to happen in the supplier and contract management lifecycle. And I'm sure my SIPFA colleagues will make this presentation available to you at the end. So let's break this down into three areas: the tendering area, the contract management space, and then the dynamic market space. So from a tendering perspective, we have a sourcing module capability. And ultimately what this is going to help you do, which is really important, and Mohammed brought this up, is this module is where all preliminary market engagement activity would be done. So I think I need to refurbish or refit one of our estates or one of our assets. I think I'm going to start that work in 2025 in December. All of that logic, that thinking, what you intend to do would get captured in that early market engagement module. And the data that sits in that workflow, which you will see, we will show you some technology, will then be sent through the Find a Tender service. Whether you are going to renew an ERP contract, whether you're renewing your HR software, and you're doing that as part of a 2026 renewal, all of that information now needs to sit in this procurement pipeline. And we help you with that. Your procurement pipeline then becomes, obviously, it matures into your planned procurement. So your pipeline then gets endorsement, the strategy of what procurement method is going to be used gets agreed. It then becomes a planned procurement. And once it's a planned procurement and you have actual dates and scopes of what you're thinking about going to market for, that information needs to be captured and sent up to the central digital platform. You've then obviously got your tender, transparency, and contract awards. Those are what most authorities are very comfortable with. Here's my tender specification. Am I running it as an RFI, an open ITT? Am I calling off a framework? All of that information would then be a result of what is the method of procurement. The transparency around communication, clarifications, amendments and addendums would all be captured in UK 5. Once you're successfully awarded a contract to one or multiple suppliers, that's then your contract disclosure notice. And if at any time during that activity you need to terminate that sourcing activity, that would be captured down here. I'm not going to step through every single one of these, but it's worth noting each of these notices have been baked into out-of-the-box workflows that help you, look, most importantly, deliver your business outcome, which is I have a supplier, I have a contract, I need them to do things, deliver things on time, on price, on scope. But at the same time, it's making sure as kind of mandatory guardrails that this notice detail is captured, structured into logical formats, and then sent into the central digital platform. And that integration is two-way. What I mean by that is your existing tendering system could be awarding a contract to a vendor or multiple, and that sits in the Find a Tender service. If customers are using our contract management module, we can pull that supplier and that award detail down into your contract management space and then start moving through these notices of 7 through 17. Ultimately, I want to come down to the value to your authority's leadership. We have built a solution as an obligation to our large public sector customer base that ultimately provides them compliance out the box. We have built a solution that, because people are people and there are always ways around work processes, we have built a solution that shows you very clearly what notices you have published, what notices you haven't, and ultimately where your compliance gaps are. So we call it, I suppose, our exception reporting that sits over this. And this is the value to leadership. They will be able to tell at any one point, where are the gaps in our compliance to policy and process? And then, like all good software, and this isn't something unique to One Advanced software, there is rules-based engines, notice generation engines, notification engines. So at a really high level, we bake the process into really easy to use technology. We use rules to ensure that things are given the best opportunity to be captured. We use reporting to highlight where non-compliance has occurred and allow you to address that. And fundamentally, it is a compliance solution out of the box. It doesn't need to be further configured. The only configuration that would really happen is your procurement documentation into the tool, or any specific procurement internal policy rules you want put there. So, kind of spoken at a high level, One Advanced, who we are, what we do for government, what our customers are telling us, what the Act means, who it applies to, what is the value to leadership by getting this right. Mohammed spoke about the consequences of not getting it right. I now want to ask everybody to, if they can bear with me for a couple of slides, to put on the hat of an individual that needs to manage a contract within your authority. And what I'm trying to frame up here is, what is the job that I need to do when I'm managing a contract? And how is it changing? So it's pretty simple. If I manage a contract, I'm a member of one of the directorates. I'm responsible for maintaining the minimum data on that information. I have to manage that through the life cycle from I've procured a good or a service, and I get that good or service delivered, checked, receipted, implemented on time, on budget, on scope. And now I need to also make sure that I'm complying with the Procurement Act by publicly disclosing information. There's a bunch of tasks that I would do today that are going to be impacted by the Act. Every time I set up a new contract or receive a contract, I have to think about new information that goes onto that. This could be things like, is this above the 5 million sterling threshold? And therefore I need to think about the KPIs on this contract. Every time a contract change comes through or a variation is required, do I need to publish that variation or change notice through the central digital platform? Every variation, performance, and payment within certain thresholds falls into scope now. And then when the contract terminates, it's no more just about contracts terminated, bottom drawer, keep it healthy for the auditors. It's now about closing out that contract correctly, terminating that contract with the right information, and making it really transparent is what you did there. Following through on that trend really quickly, and this is specifically on the contract details, right? After a contract has been signed, I must publish a notice outlining the details. As part of future benefits realization requirements, I also need to start identifying those performance metrics. This needs to be connected to the preceding tendering processes. So you can start to feel the importance of connected systems now too. So how does this change my tasks? New activities I need to do when I'm setting up a contract. I need to get continuity with all the notices that have happened before. So what we allow you to do is create contracts using existing notices already published. So let me break that down. If system A, Proactus, Delta, Intend has been the system, Atomus, that has notified Find a Tender service, that has notified of tender award or tender release, that information is now sitting and held by the CDP. We give you continuity because if you didn't use us to do those prior steps, we grab that information, we bring it down, and we ensure you have that continuity as you continue through the life cycle of the contract. I'm not going to read verbatim off the screen, but that's a really important message here, because you don't have to have one system to do it all. It is definitely beneficial, but for organizations that are mandated to use the buying conglomerates that have selected a piece of technology, you can relax knowing that the information they push to the CDP is then made accessible for us to grab and drive continuity for you. UK 10, the contract change notice. This is a really important one because I think it directly conflicts with a lot of the tendering behaviors that we often see in the supplier tendering behaviors that we often see in the public sector. We know that there is it's a well understood problem, particularly in the workspace, where contractors will bid bottom line to win your deal, and then you're 2 years into the agreement at your 36th variation. This contract change notice is really important. So when you think about your capital works, your minor works, your major works, any of your works teams, that's where we often see this biggest problem. Some of the new activities. Let's look at this one. I now, as a contract manager, need to ensure that the notice is published before any change is made effective to the contract. How we address that? This change in workflow ensures that a notice must be published before the change process can be finalized. So I have a contractor, they're above threshold, they request a change to scope, to price, to date, might even be innovation. I need to advise that there is a potential change coming. I need to capture all the changes and then process that. And finally, contract completion and termination. When an above threshold contract is coming to an end, regardless of whether it's terminated or successfully completed by that supplier, as a contract manager, I am obliged now to record information relating to the final state. What was the spend on that contract versus what we projected? What was the performance on that contract, what we projected? What was the date that was supposed to terminate? What was the date that it terminated? How many changes were made on that contract? Everything that can help the public sector understand how that performed and help suppliers to the public sector understand how that contract performed is now required. So these new activities, let's just step through those. I need to know when a termination notice is required for a contract. So it has to be a certain type of contract. I need a system to tell me that. I have to capture the final position of the contract and the closeout information. So I need to make sure that I'm ticking the relevant boxes, capturing the relevant inputs so that I can publish it. I have to publish these notices. So if I come back down to the 3 reasons why we want to solve this for a customer. Right, first one is notice workflows. So based on the attributes of any single contract, the system will automatically tell you, you'll see down here, FTS notices, which notices are required. Now, like every contract, it's going to move through a draft stage, an executed stage, and a completion stage. During each of those stages, you will see FTS information. It'll tell you tender ID, award ID, contract ID, and the supplier ID. One of the things that's worth noting is part of this central digital platform, and part of this, the enabler to this initiative, is there is going to be a single supplier identification taxonomy created. So we won't be using Dun & Bradstreet's, Cabinet won't be using Dun & Bradstreet. We're creating their own UK public sector supplier taxonomy. So that's going to be really important. All your systems will need to be able to capture that taxonomy to be able to report on this correctly if you don't have a pivot point such as this. But you get it, there is a workflow. It's going to ensure that required notices are automatically created. It'll identify the optional notices, and it's going to provide insight into the expected notices on that contract. If a contract gets awarded at 4.9 million and goes above threshold, you can expect the system to change and ask you to publish a different set of notices that look at performance and so on and so forth. Notice management. So information required to successfully and compliantly publish notices is part of a contract record lifecycle. Users will be able to view due dates for notices as well as what information is required. So you can see here, we're looking at the contract details notice. The system is built on a series of if this, then that logic. Right, so if above X value, contract performance notice is required. And it doesn't just bring up a check this box, do this step. You're responsible for going in, updating all of the information, the approvals, and the data sitting on that. Anything that's going to allow you to meet those mandatory disclosure requirements. The system has the logic to tell you what's required. It's going to give you a disclosure status from not disclosed to pending, to disclosed, to published. It's going to make it really simple for you to understand where your exceptions and gaps are. Finally, like I spoke about at the beginning, there's going to be several organizations with more than 1,000. Islington Council, as an example, is a customer of us. A very large procurer down in the London council boroughs. Thousands of contracts. Maintaining contract notice compliance across all of those without effective exception management reporting is going to be really challenging. So ultimately, there comes in pre-baked, off-the-shelf contract notice compliance. Now, I'm of the personal opinion when it comes to implementing change of policy like this, that it's okay that from the time we load every contract, we see a lot of red and we see a lot of numbers of things that aren't completed. That then means we know where to focus our attention. What are the highest value contracts where we need to go and publish notices and get things changed? What is the status of the notice? When was it created? What was its due date? What was its published date? And you can see here it's logically structured across every notice, and it will tell you where your overdues are, etc. Now, I just caught myself making a statement about prior to February 24th, what is your obligation around notices? And then post February 24th, what's your obligation around notices? Anything that's been contracted pre-September 24th will just continue to follow the PCR 2015. It's anything after that that will have all of these additional notices attached to it. So this is a view of, in my opinion, the workforce and workflow management that every leader who owns a procurement function is going to need to be able to, I suppose, hang their hat on. For customers that are using, for example, the One Advanced risk and meetings management tool, where we help you run council meetings, risk and audit committee meetings, you could expect information from this compliance dashboard to go into your risk management system to say, we have X instances of notice non-compliance. The mitigation to that is X, Y, and Z. And you can expect that to flow neatly between your procurement system, your contract system, and your risk management system. And one more slide that brings me to the end of my presentation. It's ultimately trying to help you visualize how the payment process through your finance management system into your contract module, how it's then going to integrate with, we've used a few acronyms here, FTS, Find a Tender Service, and CDP, the Central Digital Platform. So a contract record will be will store the FTS, Find a Tender Service, and Central Digital Platform OCID and contract ID values. It then can be pulled into the contracts module of One Advanced, and these are specific integrations we've created. That contract number then gets pushed into your finance system. And by push, sometimes we have sophisticated APIs. If you're using our technology, it's embedded in that. If you're using third-party finance systems, that can be either pushed into their API environment or via flat file transfer, but the information is available to be pushed. Payments then happen as your daily routine in your finance system. Payment details then come back into your contract module and will update payment against a specific contract ID. If that payment is above threshold, it will then trigger a notice to be created. Take that information, ask the user for validation that that is correct, and the finance director will be the person that actually needs to approve that, and then that will get pushed back into the Central Digital Platform. So I recognize that's a high-level schema, but in the interest of time, I hope that gives you a quick introduction to how that will be satisfied. Thank you. I think we're at 11:20, so we've got some time for questions. I'll stop sharing, Mohammed.
So thank you, Mark. Very enlightening session. Undoubtedly, Mark, what you've highlighted is that every authority will have to be agile, organized, ensure accuracy. And without technology, it's going to be very, very difficult, in fact, almost impossible. So technology is going to be a key part of the Procurement Act delivery and implementation.
Yes, yeah, I mean, absolutely it is. And like, technology is never the silver bullet, right? It's this is a change in policy first and foremost. We then have every local authority that needs to reflect that policy into their local procurement policies. And it's actually an impact to finance policy too now. I think it's an impact to risk policy. So every risk register will need to be looked at, reviewed, and updated. But then from policy, we then go into operating processes, right? What are the processes now that the people who ultimately do these jobs for us need to be thinking about? And we do know one thing, technology is one of, if not the most effective way in 2024 to ensure process governance. Process aligns to policy. Technology can drive process governance and ultimately then drive compliance with key policy items.
We've had one question from Anna. Thanks a lot. Will the Procurement Act only apply to contracts which will be entered into from the date, so the 24th of February, or will it have any retrospective kind of effect? I'll answer that question, Mark. The 24th of February is the go live date, so it won't have a retrospective effect. So any contracts that you enter up until the midnight on the 23rd of February will be under public contract regulations. Any new contracts that you award will be under the Procurement Act. However, if you've actually commenced the procurement, where you publish a contract notice now, you may actually enter into the contract after the 24th of February, but that will be governed by the public contract regulations, and any frameworks or dynamic purchasing systems that you have will also be governed by the PCR if it was actually kind of awarded under the PCR regime. So there are some transitional rules that you need to be aware of, and other colleagues. And again, it goes back, Mark, to the point that you need to have a good capture of all of your contracts, whether it's the PCR regime that applies or the Procurement Act will apply from the future. Otherwise, it could get a bit of a messy picture.
It's a really important part, Mohammed, right? I've done over 150 contract well, not done. I've been part of an organization, led an organization, done over 150 contract management system projects in the last 15 years. And one of the biggest challenges that every organization has, public sector or not, is finding all their contract data so they can get it into a system and make it useful. And so what a lot of our customers are doing at the moment is, can I get your system just so I can start outreaching to my business to get contracts into the system, because my Excel spreadsheet won't do anymore. And where we don't have contracts with a supplier, can I use your system's mechanism to go out to that supplier, kind of with my tail between my legs, and say, hey, do you have our most recent version of the contract? I need to get that into my system. So this is almost the pre-work that's happening. But if I'm to kind of lift it up a level, data quality, not actually data quality, data completeness is what's really important for then enabling the systems to do their thing effectively for you.
We've got a comment. The slides and the recording will be shared, colleagues. So if any colleagues have other questions, observations, comments, anybody think that this is going to be a much more simpler legislation to follow? Please let us have your comments on this. Matt, just to go back to the number of notices that the authorities will have to publish, and the fact that we're in a kind of period where budgets are tight, there are some cash constraints on every public authority. It's difficult to recruit staff. There's a recruitment freeze at the moment in a number of authorities. It's going to come into effect on the 24th of February in between new financial year. The impact, the number of notices at different stages that the authority will have to publish. What's your view in terms of the challenges for implementation for an authority?
Okay, so I think there's two things there, Mohammed. One is yes, absolutely, there's resource constraints. The other thing is, for those people that own procurement, you'll be aware. For those that don't own procurement, you might not be aware. There's quite an exodus of procurement talent walking out of the public sector at the moment. So it's not even trying to get your existing resources to do more work. It's actually, if you are one of the lucky, one of the fortunate authorities that can recruit, it's finding good talent to come and work in the public sector. So first and foremost, we have done some work on this. We've surveyed our customers, and we think that using technology with the absence of technology, i.e. doing things BAU, these notices will add anywhere from 10 to 15% additional work on those people that manage procurement and tendering activities. 10 to 15% additional work. Where do I find that data? How do I put that data into a format? How do I configure my tools that aren't already integrated? And then be kind of managing that backflow. So that's the first piece. The second piece then is, how quickly can people implement this kind of stuff, Mohammed? So our implementation is, we'll take you from no system, just on the contracts and supplier piece. We'll take you from no contract system to a fully compliant system in 30 days. Now, that's not going to integrate with your finance system in 30 days, but you can have a fully compliant contract system that on the 24th, when you turn on, will start sending information back and forward in 30 days. We've worked really hard at that because, humbly, we've come from a business where all of our software projects were enterprise projects. So big project teams, change managers, multiple workshops, and kind of 6 to 8 months to implement a tool. Procurement Act 2023, along with the Commercial Continuous Improvement Assessment Framework, which is another Cabinet Office thing, we've taken those two things and baked them into our out-of-the-box solution. So now, when a customer goes live with us, we take them through, how do you onboard onto the tool versus configure the tool to do 1 million backflips and 33 triple twirls. Important to know, we know customers want alignment with their specific businesses. So the way that we do this, implement 30 days to get you the compliance outcome, and then take you into a process where you can configure the thing to align to your specific organization. Two messages: 10 to 15% additional workflow for all your people, and you can get it solved pretty quickly.
Mark, some really interesting slides on contract management, and we all know that we sometimes suffer from the let and forget syndrome, where contracts are awarded, we forget about the contract. But now there's a contract termination notice that somebody needs to be alerted to the fact that you need to publish a contract termination notice. You can't just walk away from a contract because it's ended. So your system seems to be doing lots of work which would really help a practitioner and an authority make sure that they're compliant with the various obligations. Any further points on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we think about, let's move the Procurement Act and our technology to the sides for a sec. The reality is, We have employees, and there's a revolving door with employees everywhere. Contracts are often a decentralized management activity in an authority, i.e. there's not a central function that looks after all of them. There's some exceptions, but over 90% contract management is decentralized, which means Mark Reddy looks after a contract, Mohammed Hans does, and so on and so forth. Right now, without the absence of good technology, I win the lottery or decide not to come back to work on Monday, there's every chance that contract is sitting in my bottom drawer or on an email share drive. Okay, what the technology does is it says Mohammed Hans and Mark Reddy have a contract. It says if they're no longer with the business, change all Mohammed Hans contracts to Mark Reddy. And then the workflow of contract has been terminated, i.e. has actually reached a system-driven status. These are the things that need to be published in the next 20 days. So that's how it kind of puts up the guardrails. We've had a couple of questions, Mohammed, but can I, just before we tackle them, can I ask you one?
You can, yes.
And I know the answer, but I think it's very important for our audience. There's a large percentage of public contracting that is done by calling off frameworks like G-Cloud. And I think the unanswered question that would be useful for the audience is, G-Cloud 14 has just gone live. It's gone live as a framework under the PCR 2015 regulations. If I call off G-Cloud 14 on the 1st of March next year, what am I working with there?
Yeah, it's a good question. It'll be the PCR regime that the authority will have to comply with. So in terms of your governance colleagues, you're going to have a dual regime or even a triple regime if you're subject to a provider selection regime. So your governance will have to have the PCR regime until the contract comes to an end. That may be several years down the road. You'll have to comply with the Procurement Act. You'll also have to comply with the provider selection regime. So this is a very messy, very busy picture that every authority will have to deal with. So again, you'll have to go back to the contract. When was this contract procured? Was it before the 24th? Then the PCR regime will apply. If it's after the 24th, then in most cases, the Procurement Act will apply or the provider selection regime.
Perfect. So this is where systems can really help us. Systems will have baked in advice into exactly what is going to, for current legislation, exactly what it's going to mean. Thank you for answering that. And I hope the audience found that question useful because I could sense some light bulbs.
So let's pick up a few questions before we finish. So how long do the published notice need to be held on the Centre Digital platform, for example? Is it helpful for councils to hold this information online in the same way we have to publish information under the Transparency Code? I can answer that. You'll have to, once the notice is published, the notice will be there for indefinitely. It will be archived at some stage after the contract comes to an end, but all of your kind of governance documents will have to be kept for at least a 3-year period. So again, in terms of documentation, record keeping, that's a very big point. There's an express provision in the Procurement Act to maintain records. Remember, Mark, if the supplier is a bit naughty, is investigated by the minister with a view to putting them on a debarment register, the authority will have to intervene, will be asked to come and support the minister with the court action to put that supplier on a debarment register. The authority needs to have good records, otherwise the minister's not going to be too happy.
Mohammed, just before we close up, I'd love this is a really great question. So thank you, anonymous attendee. Okay, you've got the Freedom of Information Act, the Transparency Code, you've got the Procurement Act 2023. Of course, the central digital platform is now going to hold all of the notice information about your contracts. But let me just play through a quick theory. The notice information is now going to make it much more interesting for the supplier market to want questions and answers about a specific contract. And therefore, under the Freedom of Information Act, they're effectively given more bait to really want to probe and put in requests under Freedom of Information for more granular details that notices don't capture. So without really good record management systems and contract management systems that survive multiple years, I believe there's going to be more of a shopfront window for Freedom of Information Act requests to increase because the notices are going to kind of dangle some carrots, if you know what I mean. So that's a very important consideration that's kind of downstream and very much adjunct to this.
Just one final question. What are the considerations authorities should take with regard for individual care and education placement contracts? Now, again, I'll answer this question. For user choice contracts, you'll be delighted to know that you'll be able to enter into a direct award of contracts without actually any transparency obligations. But you'll have to maintain some internal records. General education contracts, they may be you may be able to take advantage of the light touch regime contracts. So there's plenty of flexibility there. So the Act does introduce lots of flexibilities, but it's the record keeping, the management, and that's going to be a big administrative burden and obligation on the authority. Mark, any final points before we finish off today?
No final points. I'm really grateful to have been able to catch up with you, Mohammed, and to speak to the CITFA community. I'm sure we've got some One Advanced customers that are also on the call. Please, I just really welcome you, and I know Mohammed shares this, to reach out to both of us. And the two of us can sit down on a call with you, for 30 minutes, have a discussion. There's a great question that's just come through that unfortunately don't have time to answer, which is around how do we start enabling confidence in the finance community and their role around it. We've got some change management artifacts. Mohammed spoke about the Cabinet Office and the artifacts that they have, but we'd really be delighted to sit down and have a discussion. But outside of that, thank you, Mohammed.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, colleagues, for coming and listening to us. As I said, this is the beginning. This is not the end. The session may have come to an end. If you do need to speak to Mark and myself, please do reach out to us. We'll be more than delighted to help you. The recording of the presentation slides will be shared with you the next couple of days. On a final note, have an enjoyable day and look forward to seeing you at future events. Thank you and goodbye.